This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the newest edition in the Compliance Podcast Network, my latest podcast, Compliance and Coronavirus. As the voice of compliance, I wanted to start a podcast which will help bring both clarity and sanity to the field of compliance, the compliance practitioner, and indeed the compliance profession during this worldwide health and healthcare crisis. Taking up a variety of topics as diverse as working from home, to sporting events, to the role of the board of directors, to crisis management, to the role of supply chains. We will look at all of these in this podcast. If you have a topic you'd like covered on compliance and coronavirus, please let me know. I'd be happy to do a podcast on it. In this podcast, I'm joined by John Shagarian. John's company, ERI, disposes of computer and computer-related equipment, and we talk about the new normal of doing business and why his business model is going to be even more important with the large number of employees who are working from home, security and data privacy, and a fascinating exploration of a wide variety of these issues. I know you'll find this podcast useful and enlightening. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And today I have with me Matt Whitaker. Matt is a co-founder of Assent Compliance. I've had him on the podcast before, but he's here today to talk to us about what I think is a great resource that Assent has put out there, which is entitled the COVID-19 Supply Chain Impact Map. Map. So, Matt, with that incredibly long-winded and botched introduction, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back, Tom.
So, Matt, I always start these podcasts asking for a check-in on how you and your family are faring during the coronavirus health crisis.
Everybody in my family is doing great. And in fact, we just had a new addition. We added a 3-month-old German Shepherd puppy. So it's been a lot of fun and been getting out, getting lots of exercise and being a puppy dad. So it's been not all bad over here.
So when we got our German Shepherd puppy and she was 60 pounds and they said 5 more pounds maybe, she's now at 120. So good luck.
She and 120. So I've got a female because I live in a condo and they told me, 60 to 65 pounds. So 120. Oh no.
So first of all, Matt, can I just start off by asking what is the Assent COVID-19 Supply Chain Impact Map?
Absolutely, and that is a bit of a tongue twister, especially when you add in Matt and MAP in the same introduction. So, Assent Compliance fundamentally is a data management company, and we're privileged to work with about 500,000 companies, all exchanging data on our platform. And what that does is gives us and our customers a unique insight into where suppliers are located geographically, and then as this pandemic broke out, we thought, okay, well, we know where a company's suppliers are geographically. That data is in our system. So if we import third-party data from, call it the World Health Organization, and there's a few different trackers out there, if we import that third-party data and we overlay it with our suppliers and their geography, we're going to get some unique insights. We're going to see where COVID is most heavily concentrated and where those suppliers are located geographically. From there, you can derive some pretty cool insights, and that's exactly what we did. So our engineers, as soon as this pandemic broke out, decided to do a hackathon, so to speak. There's probably isn't a better way to frame it. Pull in that data, overlay it with client data and supplier data, and start deriving meaningful dashboards and insights. So that's what we did with the COVID map that we're talking about.
Matt, does the map itself evolve as we have seen the virus evolve and literally move across the world? Is that one of the features?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way it works, it's near real time. So we refresh our data as quickly as the publicly available data refreshes, and of course, our customers can refresh their supplier information whenever they choose. So if they add suppliers, subtract suppliers from their supply chain. So as they do that, they get the full view of, I've got a supplier in Italy and they provide me with a key component to my product. well, Italy is now facing a shutdown, and we know that we won't be able to procure parts from there. Maybe we should look for an alternate supplier. So that's the kind of business intelligence that our customers are deriving from this, and it's very meaningful as you're in your design cycle, as you're planning for the future. And we have a thesis that companies that understand their supply chain have a mechanism to extract data from it, communicate with their suppliers, know the right person to talk to get data, are the companies that are going to emerge from this crisis in the best shape and have the fewest supply chain disruptions.
Matt, that really leads into the next topic I wanted to visit with you about, which is, we seem to be at perhaps not an inflection point, but a pivot point where I'm in the state of Texas. Our state is reopening next week. Some other states are engaging in phased reopenings. I think people are beginning to look forward now, not simply how am I going to get through the next week. How does this tool and the data generated not only by Assent, but your individual clients help them prepare for the next stage of how do we reopen and what are things going to look like after we do reopen?
Well, Tom, there's a saying that you should fix your roof when the sun is shining. And what we're seeing from our clients is this pandemic has shed light on a whole host of new supply chain issues. So if you turn back the clock a few years, there was a lot of manufacturing done in China, and layer on a trade war coupled with a pandemic, and companies all over the world are starting to say, okay, well, if I'm highly dependent on one specific geographic area, China just being one of them, but any geographic area, and there becomes an issue, whether it be politically driven, whether it be event driven, and we can't procure our parts or components from there, or they're suddenly taxed at an extortionate rate, well, that puts us in a very vulnerable position. So we're seeing a new paradigm shift where companies are looking at their supply chain and saying, do I have alternate suppliers that I can turn to if there's a disruption event, if there's a political event, if there's new tariffs, and in this case, if there's a pandemic. So overall, what we're seeing and where this crisis is in its evolution is actually just a catalyst to companies everywhere taking more precaution and more introspection into their supply chains and their supply chain data. So it's like a new paradigm shift. We're really seeing a massive uptick in the amount of data that's being exchanged on our platform. We're seeing a whole host of companies come and really want to take a look at where are my first tier suppliers, where are my second tiers, where are my alternates, and where are my risks. So it's an interesting time being in the supply chain business.
Matt, one of the themes in the commentary seems to be that prior to COVID-19, many companies tried to be as efficient as possible in their supply chain, just-in-time suppliers or one or two key suppliers. Now the thought seems to be perhaps you need to build in a little fluff, a little fat, some backup supplies, some backup suppliers, or some supply routes. How is either Assent helping customers think through that, or are you getting some questions about how to move to a situation where you are a little more protected, even if it's inefficient?
Well, that's a good point. So when you say add a bit of cushion, add a bit of fat, you're essentially just saying we need to make our supply chain a bit more resilient and then maybe take a bit of hit on gross margin. And companies everywhere are actually coming to that realization that if a country shuts down or we don't have ample supplies and we have to go into a production stop, that's a huge risk for any manufacturer. So you bring up a good point, and this is already, like I said, this was already happening because of the trade war being one catalyst, but this is just another catalyst that acts as an accelerant to companies really coming to the realization that we have to build in some resilience, and it might suck to take a small margin cut, but maybe just-in-time delivery isn't exactly what we need for every single SKU, every single product line. So on our platform, companies are exchanging data like what's your disaster relief plan? What if X factory shuts down? So part of our platform it allows companies to quickly and effectively survey any supplier that they want to extract any data. So we're seeing an uptick in data management, or rather supply-related surveys going out in our network.
Matt, one of the things, key things I think that I've heard from you and your colleagues at Assent is that a compliance program of any sort really starts with understanding your risk. Whether you call that a risk management strategy, whether you call that a risk assessment, a risk evaluation, but it's that a company needs to understand its risk points. Does the data generated by not only the supply chain impact map, but really the entire panoply of data that Assent makes available to its clients and customers help them have a more robust and more sophisticated look at risk, given the catalysts that we've been talking about in this podcast?
Well, the COVID map is just one data point. And when you look at your supply chain holistically, basically what we're seeing our clients do is take a hard look at every single piece of data throughout the organization that they need to collect. And that usually starts with payment data, but then it goes to security and IT policies. Then it goes to audit and inspection of factories. Then it goes to sourcing data. Then it goes to, well, what's actually in this product or component? Then it goes to trade regulations. So when you look across the spectrum of all the information that a company needs to collect and gather, what we're seeing now is the centralization of that and the homogenization of that within big companies. And this is typically done siloed. So the trade compliance person would go out and ask for trade compliance data. The materials compliance data would ask for some materials compliance data. But it wasn't homogenized and it wasn't done at a more centralized corporate level. So we're seeing a migration to that. And again, the COVID pandemic is more of just a catalyst that's accelerating what's already happening. So this trend has been going on. Assent has been in business for 10 years. And we're seeing this more and more. And we're just seeing that COVID is an accelerant to it. So again, the companies that win, the companies that emerge from this pandemic on top are those that are going to have access to the most up-to-date information from their suppliers and are going to suffer the fewest supply chain disruptions. And you bring up a great point that, companies everywhere just need to know certain things. And if you can't extract that data, you open yourself up to unneeded risk, because it's not that hard to get and it's not that hard to build a program. And I'm sure you see this when you're interviewing law folks when it comes to compliance and abiding by the letter of the law. Like, I'm sure you see this on the podcast all the time.
So, Matt, I had the chance earlier in this podcast series to interview your colleague, Jared Connors. And Jared, we talked about responsible sourcing for minerals. And Jared made the point that regulators are not going away, regulations are not going away. Regulators may have sympathy right now to what companies are going through, but if you don't have processes in place to not only collect the data, but identify anomalies, red flags, or even issues that arise, 2 or 3 years from now, you may be sanctioned for that by regulators. Is that his general thoughts that regulators and regulations are not going away is consistent with what you're seeing at your level as well?
Well, of course. And right now, our government's doubling down on all enforcement for everything. Well, no, we're in the middle of a crisis. But that just goes back to my point, is you fix your roof when the sun is shining. And if there is a window where maybe enforcement's going to be lax for certain regulations, or maybe government officials don't need or aren't being as harsh on violators, this is the time to really get everything in order, because that is going to impact companies. There are regulations for a reason. There is enforcement for a reason. But for me, I see what we do, and I see the position that companies are in right now as more of an opportunity and more upside. There's more of an opportunity for companies to better understand their first tier suppliers. There's a better opportunity for companies right now to understand their risks and get their house in order. And there's an expression we've heard on a few different calls: never let a good crisis go to waste. This is the opportunity now for companies really to get their supply chain in order. And if there were certain trends that were already manifesting themselves but only accelerating, now is the time to kind of capitalize on that opportunity to to double down on supply chain.
And if I might take it in just a little bit different direction for my final point, as you know, I'm in Houston. The economic dislocation, separate and apart from coronavirus, but also obviously influenced by it, is very severe here in Houston. That's because of energy. And companies are struggling to make themselves more efficient, while in many cases cutting their staffs literally by 50% or more. And so I really appreciated your thoughts on internal mining of data, because it also strikes me that one of the ways companies can really move forward, even in dire economic straits as we are in Houston, is to take a look at their own data reservoir, and utilize what was previously siloed. Would those same concepts work in the supply chain as well?
Well, it's unfortunate what's happening in the energy sector. And when you think about introspection to your company, this is the time where companies are looking to be more efficient and more effective. And one way you do that, and one way you ensure that as people come and go throughout your company, is to have systems and tools and processes in place. And we're lucky enough to provide that underpinning. So just for example, and this has happened to many of our clients, a key person leaves, whether it's voluntary, involuntary, a key person leaves and they're literally stuck. We don't know where this information is. We don't know where our trade compliance information is, our sourcing data, our materials data. X person had it and they're not here anymore. So this is the time when companies have to be more efficient, and they need the tools to do that. And doing any sort of workflow, doing any sort of data collection, data management, document review, doing it manually just puts companies at undue risk, but it also is incredibly inefficient. So you're spending more money on bringing people in to do that work. And we're not talking about replacing anybody. Our software doesn't do that. It just 10x's their efficiency. So this is the time when companies can realize those efficiencies, realize those gains, and ultimately reduce their risk.
Matt, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time. I'm going to link to the COVID-19 supply chain impact map and the Assent site on my show notes. I greatly appreciated you taking the time to visit with me. And if there's another site that listeners should go to, could you tell us what it might be?
Well, the best place for Assent is just www.assentcompliance.com. And the COVID map is linked directly off the homepage. But no, it's great to be here, and Tom, your show's fantastic, and thanks for having me back again. This is like our third time, so love getting a chance to catch up and chat with you.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. If you have any questions or you have a topic you would like explored on this podcast, please shoot me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, as a call to action, I would ask if you could to please tell one of your friends about the podcast so we can spread the word out about the newest podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network. Also, if you would leave us a rating on iTunes or a review, it would greatly help get the word out about this most important podcast over the next several months. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me for our next episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. This podcast is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.